The COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and conflict are all exacerbating gender inequality. International aid agency CARE has found that 150 million more women than men are going hungry worldwide. Women were also found to be 3 times more likely to report stress and mental health issues. And in situations of scarcity or conflict, women and girls often pay the steepest price, and they are at heightened risk of gender-based violence. So what can be done to bridge the gender divide? For more, we're joined by Athena Nguyen, a human rights advocate and also senior manager of the Capability and Impact Unit at International Aid Agency CARE. She joins us from Kyabram, Victoria in Australia. Now, Athena, your report describes how women and girls experience humanitarian crises differently from men and boys. Explain this to us, and let's start with food security.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. So our recent report draws together findings from across 9 different countries, including Afghanistan and Ukraine, and it confirms what we've found in our practice of responding to a humanitarian crisis, which is, as you mentioned, how women and girls experience these differently to men and boys based on underlying inequalities, access to rights, and access to resources. So one of the big differences we found was in terms of food security. So our report shows that women are twice as likely to report food insecurity than men. And we know that when food is scarce, women and girls tend to eat last, eat less, or skip meals altogether, often so that other family members can eat.
So I would assume that this food insecurity is also tied to the issue of mental health, which you say is also more worrisome for women. In which countries is this most acute, have you found?
Yes, absolutely. The other main area where we found there was a significant difference between women and men was in the area of mental health. So women facing humanitarian crises are 3 times more likely than men to report mental health as an area of concern. And some of the reasons behind this include that women's health is more affected by things such as increased unpaid work burdens, limited livelihood opportunities, gender-based violence, forced marriages, and other negative coping strategies. So we found that in countries which face particular political turmoil and where women's rights and freedoms were increasingly constrained, such as in Afghanistan, that the mental health and well-being of women was more acute.
And your report, as you mentioned, got responses from more than 6,000 women across 9 countries from what you say are communities in crisis. How would you define this term that you use, and what else did you discover?
Yes, so our report looked at communities that were facing humanitarian crisis, conflict, climate change, and also the impact of the COVID pandemic. So situations in which the social and political structure of the society was being challenged in significant ways, and where there was significant movement of people, either internal displacement or as refugees. So whilst we did find that livelihoods or the ability to support oneself was a concern for both men and women, slightly more so for women, we found that in these other ways, mainly food insecurity, mental health, gender-based violence, increased caring responsibilities, things like that, the situation was more strained for women.
And I want to look a bit closer at climate change and its impact on communities, which is another area of focus for you. How is this affecting women in Australia and the Pacific Islands in particular?
Well, as we're seeing on the news on an almost daily basis, communities both in our region and beyond are experiencing increasingly intense storms, cyclones, floods, droughts as a result of climate change. And our report found that women are particularly impacted by both slow onset climate change as well as climate disasters for a similar reason that they're more impacted by other crises. Women are more likely to live in poverty, have less access to rights and resources. And so when climate change or disasters strike, then they have less resources to be able to see themselves through a crisis as well as recover afterwards. We also found that following a crisis, there is an increased risk of gender-based violence. And when a disaster strikes, women are often left out of decision-making processes on how to respond, which means that sometimes those responses may not be taking into account the specific needs of women and girls.
I want to pick up on that point of the decision-making process, because you've said that we don't have gender equality in humanitarian decision-making. So how is your organization helping to change that, to help women to take on roles where they are not just on the receiving end, but are actively part of the solution?
Absolutely. So CARE works in 111 countries around the world. We do provide basic resources such as shelter, food, water, and other things that are essential to survival. But we also focus on working with local women and local communities to ensure that women are able to participate in and lead the responses to humanitarian crisis. We also advocate for more foreign aid and to ensure that that foreign aid is actually reaching those who need it the most, such as women, children, and people with disabilities. And one way to do this is to provide funding to local organisations and women's organisations. So local communities and local women can actually lead the response and recovery process themselves.
Well, Athena, thank you very much for your insights. That was Athena Nguyen, a human rights advocate from international aid agency CARE Australia.